This video is going to show you how to use what's called a two-way table to test to see if there's an association between two variables. So the question, how you might look at the question is you could say, are students who do chores more likely to get an allowance? The mathematical way of saying that would be, is there an association between doing chores and getting an allowance? And there's basically three steps for figuring out if there's an association between these two things. The first one is we have to figure out which percent of kids the percentage of kids who get an allowance. So to do that, we're going to need to know the total number of kids. So we've got 13 kids and 5 kids. That's 18 kids total who get an allowance. We have 3 kids and 4 kids. That's 7 kids that don't. So our total survey of kids who are in this survey is 25 kids. So I got 25 kids. But we're interested in the percentage of kids who get an allowance. So we're going to need two numbers for that. We need to know how many kids get an allowance. Let's see here. That would be allowance. We need to look at all kids who get an allowance. That's 18 kids. And then we need to know the total number of kids in the survey. That's 25 kids. So here's our fraction, but we want a percentage. So we have to take 18 and we want to divide that by 25. So to do that, we just need to get our calculator out here and do 18 divided by 25, which is 0.72, 0.72, which if you move the decimal point 2 times to the right is 72%. So of this population, 72% of the kids get an allowance. The second thing we'll have to look at is the percentage of kids who do chores that get an allowance. So what we're going to have to do is look at two numbers to find a percentage. The kids who do chores that get an allowance. So let's see here. We have 13 kids who do chores and get an allowance. So that's 13 kids. And then we have to look at the total number of kids who do chores. Well, I've got 13 kids here and 3 kids here, so that's 16 kids total. So I have 13 kids out of 16 who get an allowance. Again, I'll take my calculator and divide 13 by 16. 13 divided by 16 is about 81%. So it's 0.8125. 0.125. Move the decimal 2 times to the right. 12 gives us 81.25%. I'm just going to go back to how I set this table up. One way to check yourself is, for my first percentage, I'm looking at 18 and 25, which came from here and here. Now, my second ratio, my second fraction was 13 out of 16. You can see I color-coded my two-way table. I know I'm doing it right if no cell, none of these boxes, which are called cells, are highlighted twice. You can see I highlighted this and this for my first ratio and this for my second. So you should never have it where you're highlighting the same cell twice. If you are, you're making a mistake. And also there should be some cells here that we didn't use. Like for example, I didn't use this, I've got 9 kids total who don't do chores. I didn't need that number. So I've got my percentages. I've got 72% and 81%. So we just have to compare those percentages to come back and answer the question. Is there an association between doing chores and getting an allowance? Now, later in mathematics, you'll have a more complicated way of looking at these numbers, but for now it's going to be very simple. We've got, this is the percentage of kids who do chores and get an allowance. This is the percentage of kids who just get an allowance. So you can see the kids who do chores are more likely to get an allowance than just kids in general. So I would say yes, there is an association between doing chores and getting an allowance. However, that being said, these numbers aren't terribly far apart. 81% and 72% are pretty close. So while there is an association, I wouldn't say there is a strong association. So if I want to be I wanted to write that out, I would say, yes, there is an association between doing chores and getting an allowance. But it's not a strong association, because again, those two percentages are not terribly far apart. If it was, say, 13% and 81%, you could say, yes, there's an association. That's a very strong association. So that is a short video on how to use a two-way table to determine if there's an association between two variables.